Once upon a time, in a vibrant village, there lived a young lady named Bolu. Bolu was a special girl with a big smile and sparkly eyes. She was the only child of her parents. Everyone in the village who knew her would say, "Look, there goes Bolu, the gem of our village." Bolu's mother and father loved her very much. They had a mansion with many rooms filled with laughter and love. Around the house, expansive farms were brimming with a variety of fruits and vegetables and fields that stretched far and wide beneath the golden sun. Her father owned the biggest fabric stores in the market, where people came from all over to buy fabric. Bolu's parents gave her everything she needed, and her heart was full of joy. Everywhere Bolu went, she went with her mother and father. They took her to colorful markets, and to visit friends in nearby villages. Everyone who met Bolu loved her because she was kind and sweet, just like her parents. But the best part of Bolu's house was the secret. There was one room that nobody ever went into, even Bolu hasn't gone in there. It was the mystery room, and it made her home feel like a castle with hidden treasures. So, in her big beautiful mansion, with her loving mother and father, Bolu's life was like a wonderful dream. And that's how the story of Bolu began, a girl whose life was filled with laughter, joy, and a secret waiting to be discovered. One sunny day, something very sad happened. Bolu's mother and father went on a trip to visit some friends in another village. They were traveling in their luxurious jeep, the one painted with white. Bolu didn't go with them because she was a bit under the weather, so she stayed at home, resting. But that day, the road was trickier than anyone expected. It twisted and turned faster and wilder than usual. Bolu's mother and father tried to steer their jeep carefully, but a truck came speeding toward them from the opposite direction. Suddenly, with a loud crash, their car skidded off the road and flipped over. It was a terrible accident, and sadly, Bolu's mother and father didn't survive, leaving little Bolu all alone in the world. When the news reached the village, everyone felt great sadness. Bolu was very, very sad. She missed her mother and father so much. Her tears fell like raindrops, and her smile was gone. The villagers, who loved her parents and her, came to her house. They brought her food, hugged her, and cried with her to show respect for her mother and father. The people in the village did something very special to honor her parents. They decided to close the market for a few days. No one bought or sold anything. Instead, they remembered all the good times they had with Bolu's parents. They talked about how kind and generous they were and how they made the village a brighter place. The vibrant village was quiet during those days, quieter than it had ever been. Everyone was mourning, showing their love for Bolu's family and hoping to comfort her in her big loss. And so, the village stood still. The young lady with the big smile, now filled with sadness, learned that sometimes, even in the brightest places, sad things can happen. But her village was with her, holding her hand through it all. In Bolu's big, beautiful mansion, where every room was filled with laughter and love, there was one different room. It was the forbidden room, a room so secret that even Bolu, the baby of the house, was never allowed to peek inside. This room had a big old wooden door with a heavy lock that glinted in the sunlight. The key to the lock was hidden, and nobody talked about where it might be. The walls around the door were draped in colorful cloth, making it look mysterious and important. Now, this wasn't just any room. Oh no, it was a room wrapped in whispers and shadows. The older servants in the house, those who had been there since Bolu was just a baby, knew there was something wrong with this room. They knew that it held a secret so big that it could scare the stars away from the sky. Long ago, before Bolu was born, some curious servants wondered what was behind that door. They tried to listen at the keyhole or peek under the door, but, oh dear, those who tried too hard to find out the secret disappeared just like that, poof. One day, they were there, and the next day, they were gone. Nobody knew where they went, and after a while, no one dared to talk about them anymore. The other servants whispered among themselves, "Never go near that room. If you do, you might vanish too, like the wind that disappears at the end of the day." So, they just cleaned around the door, never touching it, always walking past it quickly with their heads down. Bolu knew there was something wrong with the room, of course. Her parents had always told her, "That's a special room, my dear." But because they had forbidden her to enter, she believed it was best to respect their wishes and leave it alone. It's for the best. Because she loved and trusted them, Bolu never questioned their words. She simply nodded, even as her little heart raced every time she passed by the forbidden door, a mix of curiosity and unease stirring within her. So the room stayed locked and silent, holding its boomed with life around it. It was like a quiet shadow in a sea of sunshine, always there, always waiting. After the sad loss of her parents, Bolu needed help to take care of her big beautiful mansion. One sunny morning, she decided to find new helpers. That's when she met Tolu and Bayo, two servants from the village. They were known for being very kind and hardworking, and everyone liked them because they always smiled and said nice things. Tolu was as bright as the morning sun, always ready to lend a hand or share a laugh. Her colleague Bayo was just as cheerful but a bit quieter, always thinking, always watching carefully to learn things quickly. They became very close, like siblings, helping each other and sharing their experiences as they worked together. Bolu liked them right away. She saw how neatly they did their work and how politely they spoke to everyone. "You two will be perfect for my mansion," she told them with a hopeful smile, trying to make her big, quiet mansion feel like a home again. The two servants were happy to help Bolu. They moved into the servants' quarters and started their new jobs the very next day. They swept the floors, polished the furniture, and made sure everything in the house was just right. Tolu loved to sing while she worked, and her voice was so sweet that even the birds would stop to listen. Bayo, on the other hand, was great at fixing things. No broken gate or leaky roof lasted long with him around. As they worked, they respected all the house's rules, especially the one about the forbidden room. They had heard whispers about it from the other servants. "That's the room no one goes into," they were told, and they nodded seriously, understanding the importance of the rule. Bolu felt a little lighter with the two servants around. Their cheerful ways brought new life to the mansion, filling it with warmth that had long been missing. Tolu had a knack for making her laugh with her stories and songs, while Bayo's steady presence and reassuring words made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Their loyalty was clear in every small act, from the way they carefully tended to the garden her parents loved to the way they always checked on her before bed. With Tolu and Bayo there, the shadows in the corners of the vast mansion seemed a little less dark, and the heavy silence that once loomed now felt softer, almost welcoming. The once cold and empty halls began to feel alive again, with the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and the occasional clatter of dishes in the kitchen. For the first time since the accident, Bolu began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the mansion could feel like home again. Days after, life at Bolu's mansion began to settle into a new rhythm, with the warmth of Tolu's laughter and the steady hum of Bayo's chatter filling the once quiet halls. The days felt lighter, almost normal, as if the house itself had started to breathe again. But the secret of the forbidden room lingered a shadow in the back of Bolu's mind. A question left unanswered. It hovered in the air like a whisper, weaving through the walls, waiting. Always. The anniversary of Bolu's parents' passing was approaching, and the whole house was busy preparing for the remembrance ceremony. It was a big event in the village, and everyone wanted everything to look perfect to honor their memory. Tolu and Bayo were especially busy cleaning every corner and making sure the house sparkled. As they cleaned, they moved from room to room, dusting, sweeping, and arranging, but there was one room they hadn't touched, the forbidden room. Tolu, ever curious, noticed that despite all their cleaning, the door to that room stayed firmly shut. Its locks are shiny and unmarked by fingerprints. One day, while they were preparing, Tolu turned to Bayo and whispered, "Have you ever wondered what's inside that room? We've cleaned everywhere else, but that room. We've never even opened the door." Bayo looked at the door, his eyes filled with curiosity but also caution. "Yes, but remember what the others said. It's forbidden for us, for anyone. We shouldn't think about it too much." But the question had already planted itself in Tolu's mind. Later that day, she found a moment to ask Bolu. "Miss Bolu," she began gently, "there's one room we haven't cleaned. With so many people coming for the ceremony, shouldn't we clean it too?" Bolu, who was arranging some gifts, paused and looked towards the forbidden room. Her face turned a bit serious, and her voice was firm. "No, Tolu. That room is fine. It doesn't need to be cleaned. And I need you to promise me, You and Bayo, never to worry about that room. It must stay closed. Talou nodded, a little disappointed, but respecting Bolu's wishes. Yes, Miss Bolu, she replied. But the mystery of the room tugged at her heart. Why was it so important to keep it closed? What is inside that made it so special? That evening, Talou and Bayo talked about it in hushed tones. Maybe it's full of treasure, Talou guessed, her imagination running wild. Or maybe it's a secret place where stories of old are kept, Bayo added, loving a good mystery as much as his companion. Despite their curiosity, they both agreed to follow Bolu's instructions. They didn't go near the room again, focusing on their duties and the upcoming ceremony. But the seed of wonder had been sown, and both knew that the question of what lay behind that locked door wouldn't leave them alone. It was a riddle wrapped in a mystery, hidden just out of reach, and it called to them, soft and persistent, in the quiet moments of their days, as the day of the remembrance ceremony approached. The village buzzed with excitement. Visitors from nearby and far-off villages began to arrive, their chatter and footsteps filling the air with a mix of anticipation and reverence. Bolu's home became the focal point of the preparations, with guests admiring its grandeur and the careful attention to detail in every arrangement. Talou and Bayo worked tirelessly, ensuring each guest felt welcome and the house was flawless. Yet, the influx of visitors and the constant discussions about honoring the past only deepened the allure of the forbidden room. It seemed to call out to them, a soft, persistent whisper beneath the lively commotion of the house. One quiet evening, after a long day of preparations, Talou and Bayo sat together in the kitchen. The mansion had fallen silent for a while, and the two began to share their thoughts. Everyone's talking about memories and secrets, Talou said, her eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and curiosity. And here we are, with a room full of secrets in this house, yet we know nothing about it. Bayo nodded, his curiosity stirred by the day's conversations. It's strange, isn't it? A part of the house we're not allowed to see. What could be so important or so dangerous that it has to remain hidden from us? Though they both knew they'd been warned never to enter, the mystery felt impossible to ignore. They decided they had to uncover what lay behind the door of the forbidden room. But we need to be careful, Bayo cautioned, his practical side taking over. We can't just barge in. We need a plan, something to make sure we don't end up like those who vanished. Talou nodded with a determined look. All right, here's the plan, she whispered. One of us will go in first, while the other stays by the door. Bayo glanced at the heavy door ahead and swallowed hard. Okay, but we won't stay long. Just a quick look, right? Exactly, Talou said, her voice firm. Whoever goes in will take a quick look around and then come back to tell what they found. No messing around, no risks. Bayo nodded slowly, his nerves showing. All right, let's do it. But we have to be careful. No getting into trouble. Talou gave a faint smile. We'll be fine, she said, though her hands trembled slightly. Their simple but smart plan was set, and there was no turning back. We'll be quick. If anything feels wrong, we'll leave immediately, no hanging around. With their plan set, the two felt both excited and nervous. They knew they were breaking the rules, but their curiosity was too strong to ignore. That night, they went to bed with their secret plan on their minds, wondering what mysteries the forbidden room might hold. The room, silent and untouched, seemed to be waiting for them. The next morning arrived quietly, with the sky still dim. Talou and Bayo woke early, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. They crept out of bed, careful not to make any noise that might wake the other servants or guests. Moving softly through the quiet house, they made their way to the forbidden room. As they got closer, the air seemed cooler, and the hallway felt oddly long. The door stood before them, large, old, and imposing. When Talou reached out, the handle felt cold against her hand. Bayo stood guard as Talou took a deep breath and slowly turned the handle. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, as if the door had been waiting for this moment. With her heart pounding, Talou nudged the door open with her foot and stepped inside. The instant she crossed the line, the light from the hallway vanished. Swallowed by a deep, impenetrable darkness, "I can't see anything," she called out, her voice trembling with fear. Outside the room, Bayo strained to hear Tulu's voice. As he listened closely, the sounds around him started to fade, like he was sinking underwater. Before long, there was nothing, no birds, no distant noises, and no sign of Tulu. Alarmed and desperate to help, he stepped into the room to find her. As he crossed the threshold, his sight remained, but an eerie silence engulfed him, taking away his ability to hear or speak. Inside, Bayo could see the room clearly, a simple space with only an old chest at its center. However, no sound reached him, not even his footsteps or Tulu's cries. Meanwhile, Tulu, trapped in complete darkness, could hear Bayo moving but couldn't see him. "Bayo, are you there? Can you see me?" she shouted, her voice echoing strangely in the endless blackness. Bayo, unable to hear her voice, tried to communicate by moving closer, his hands reaching out blindly. He could make out Tulu's faint outline as she reached for him, but when he tried to respond, his voice was completely silent. Frustrated and afraid, he finally found her arm and held on tightly. They stood together, one unable to hear, the other unable to see, both caught in the strange, overwhelming effects of the room. Panic began to rise as they realized they were trapped, isolated in two different worlds, unable to fully communicate or understand what was happening. Determined to escape, Bayo took Tulu's hand and began leading her back toward the door. He hoped stepping out of the room would end their nightmare. The moment they crossed the marked line back into the hallway, their bodies collapsed to the ground. Both Tulu and Bayo were lifeless, their skin pale and cold. The mansion's silence swallowed the tragedy, and no one knew what had happened. As dawn broke on the day of the long-awaited ceremony, the village buzzed with energy. People hurried about, preparing for the festivities, their voices mingling with the sounds of the early morning. Inside the grand house, Bolu was busy overseeing the final arrangements. At first, she didn't notice that Tulu and Bayo were missing. The two were always reliable, and their absence didn't immediately raise suspicion. But as the hours passed and they were nowhere to be found, Bolu began to worry. "We haven't seen them this morning," one of the servants informed her, his face tense. Bolu's chest tightened. It wasn't like them to disappear, especially on such an important day. "Search everywhere," Bolu instructed, her voice trembling slightly. "The gardens, the storerooms, every corner of the mansion. Find them." The servants quickly scattered, calling out the two names as they searched. "Tulu, where are you? Bayo, where are you too?" Their voices echoed through the halls and across the grounds, but no response came. Tulu and Bayo were not in the kitchen, the garden, or along the familiar path to the mansion. The more places they searched, the stronger Bolu's unease grew. As midday approached, the cheerful anticipation of the ceremony gave way to anxiety in the household. Bolu stood by a window, her mind racing. She tried to recall the last time she had seen the two servants, but nothing seemed out of place then. They wouldn't just leave, she muttered to herself, gripping the windowsill. By the time the first guests began arriving, the house was in quiet chaos. Bolu instructed the servants to keep Tulu and Bayo's disappearance a secret. "Don't mention this to anyone," she said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. "Not their parents, not the chiefs, not the elders, no one." As day turned to evening with still no sign of Tulu and Bayo, Bolu's worry turned into a deep, chilling fear. She stared toward the hallway leading to the forbidden room, the one no one was allowed to enter. A thought crept into her mind, unshakable despite her efforts to dismiss it. "They would have told me if they were going somewhere," she whispered to herself, her eyes lingering on the shadowed door at the end of the hall. The search continued late into the night, with lanterns casting flickering light as servants searched the house and around the area. But Tulu and Bayo remained missing, and the house felt heavier with each passing hour. Bolu, standing by her window, watched the search parties with growing dread. Her home, once vibrant and full of life, now felt suffocating, as though it was hiding something terrible. Days passed, and the unease in the house grew unbearable. The servants moved quietly, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Bolu barely ate or slept, consumed by guilt and dread. Then, a foul smell began to creep through the house. At first, Bolu thought it might be something spoiled in the kitchen, but the stench grew stronger, more overwhelming. It was the unmistakable scent of decay, and it filled every corner of the house. The servants whispered anxiously, covering their noses as they worked. What could it be? One murmured, glancing nervously at the forbidden room. By the third day, the smell was unbearable. Bolu wandered the halls, pale and restless, the odor seeming to mock her growing fear. That night, lying awake in her bed, she couldn't escape the thought that the source of the smell lay behind the forbidden door. Early the next morning, Bolu summoned her most trusted servant. "We can't ignore this any longer," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to find out what's causing it." The group of servants and elders moved cautiously through the house, their faces lined with worry as they whispered among themselves. The foul smell lingered heavily in the air, growing stronger as they approached the end of the hallway. One of the elders stopped abruptly, sniffing the air. "It's coming from that direction," he said, pointing toward the door at the far end of the hall. Bolu, trailing behind, felt a lump form in her throat. She knew which door they were heading toward, the forbidden room. Another elder turned to her. "Bolu, what is in this room? Why is it locked?" Bolu hesitated, her heart pounding. It was always locked," she said quietly. "My parents told me it was a special room, and I was never allowed inside. I don't even have the key." The servants exchanged uneasy glances, and one of them said nervously, "But the smell. It's coming from there. We can all feel it." An elder stepped forward, his voice firm. "If the key is missing, we have no choice. That door must be opened. This smell, it's unnatural." Bolu looked at them, her eyes wide with fear. "But your parents are no longer here," the elder interrupted gently but firmly. "We need to know what's inside. For the safety of everyone in this house, the door must be broken." The group stood in tense silence for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Finally, one of the stronger servants stepped forward, wielding a heavy tool. "Stand back," he said, his voice trembling. Bolu stepped aside, clutching her hands to her chest as the servant raised the tool. With a loud crash, the door gave way, swinging open to reveal the dark and chilling secrets inside. Inside, the truth was revealed. Lu and Bayo lay on the cold floor, their lifeless bodies pale but peaceful. A gasp rippled through the group, followed by silence. Bolu stared at the sight, her hands trembling. Tears streamed down her face as the reality set in. The two, loyal and beloved, servants had paid the price for a secret she hadn't understood. The elders exchanged solemn glances. One spoke softly, "This house holds a darkness, Bolu. One that must be confronted." Bolu, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, could only nod. Tulu and Bayo's tragic fate was not just a loss, it was a warning. And the weight of her family's hidden past now rested fully on her shoulders. The news of Tulu and Bayo's deaths had spread quickly, and the once quiet whispers of grief had turned into sharp accusations. A crowd had gathered in the square, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. How could something so terrible happen under her roof? One man shouted, his voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. Convened to address the situation. The head elder stood before the crowd, his expression grave. "Bolu, you are accused of harboring darkness within your mansion, a darkness that has taken the lives of Tulu and Bayo. What do you say in your defense?" Bolu, trembling under the weight of the accusations, raised her hands in a plea for understanding. "I knew nothing of the evil in that room," she cried. "I obeyed my parents' wishes to keep it locked, believing it was for the good of the family. I would never harm Tulu and Bayo. They were like family to me. But the crowd, consumed by fear and grief, would not listen." "Liar!" someone shouted. "Her family has always been strange. This was bound to happen." The elders exchanged troubled glances. They did not fully believe the accusations against Bolu, but the village's collective fury left them little choice. The head elder sighed deeply before speaking. "For the safety of the village, we must act decisively. Bolu, your presence has brought darkness upon us, and we cannot allow it to continue." As dusk fell, the village gathered at the outskirts of the settlement. Bolu stood bound to a wooden post, tears streaming down her face. She searched the crowd for a friendly face, for anyone who might defend her, but found only cold, fearful stares. The elders lit the pile of wood at her feet, the flames catching quickly and climbing toward her. Bolu's cries of protest turned into a piercing wail of anger and despair. As the fire consumed her, she summoned her final strength to curse the people who had turned against her. "I curse this village," she screamed, her voice cutting through the crackling flames. "May you all face the pain of false accusations. May you know what it is to be betrayed by those you trust." Her words echoed into the night, sending shivers down the spines of those who had condemned her. The fire roared, and Bolu's voice faded, leaving the village cloaked in an eerie silence. The following morning, a sense of unease lingered over the village. Though Bolu's death was supposed to bring peace, the air felt heavier, and the sky darker. Strange things began to happen. Livestock wandered off and disappeared. Crops withered overnight. Quarrels broke out among neighbors who had been friends for years. The village, once a close-knit community, became rife with distrust. One day, a child ran into the square, screaming about a shadow that had spoken to her in Bolu Mom's voice. She said the curse is real. She's still here. The child cried, her wide eyes filled with terror. The elders gathered to discuss the growing unrest, but they too were not spared. Each night, they were haunted by dreams of Bolu, her face twisted in rage, her voice a chilling whisper, "You will know my pain." Realizing that their actions had unleashed a curse, the elders called for a cleansing ritual. They sought the help of an elderly priestess, who lived on the outskirts of the village. The priestess arrived, her presence commanding, and surveyed the village with knowing eyes. "The spirit of Bolu lingers because justice was denied," the priestess said. "Her anger feeds on your guilt, and it will not rest until the truth is uncovered." The villagers, desperate to end their suffering, agreed to the ritual. Over 3 days, they offered sacrifices and prayers, begging Bolu's spirit for forgiveness. On the final night, as the priestess completed her chants, a strong wind swept through the village, extinguishing every flame and leaving them in total darkness. In that silence, Bolu's voice rang out one last time. "You chose to punish me without seeking the truth. May this serve as a lesson. Harm none without cause, for the darkness you fear often lies within yourselves." With that, the oppressive weight lifted, and the village returned to a fragile peace. Yet, the memory of Bolu and the events that led to her tragic end remained etched in their hearts. The forbidden room was sealed forever, and the villagers lived with the understanding that fear and ignorance were their true enemies. The once bustling village now moved with caution, each step a reminder of the past. Bolu's name became a quiet warning, whispering to children who strayed too far from home, "Beware the wrath of the wronged." Yet, even now, no one truly knows what was in that secret room or the dark forces that claimed their lives, leaving the mystery and its consequences to haunt the village. The moral of the story is that when your mind is unsettled by doubts or questions, it is better to seek the truth than to blindly follow what you've been told. Ignorance and fear can lead to tragedy, but understanding and courage to uncover the truth can prevent harm and foster wisdom. If Bolu had sought to uncover the secrets of the forbidden room, she might have prevented the terrible fate that befell Tolu and Bayo.